Good afternoon, and welcome to the opening plenary with Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford, Creating Meaningful and Lasting Change. This is going to be the opening plenary for our ABA Wildy Civic Engagement Summit, Lead the Way, the Importance of Civic Engagement by Young Lawyers. If you have any questions for our panelist, Mr. Ford, today, please put them in the Q&A function, and we will make sure that if we have time, we will ask those questions. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please also put those in the chat function, and someone will assist you. I'll now introduce myself and Mr. Ford. My name is Chris Brown. I am the Deputy Law Director for my hometown, Mansfield, Ohio. And this year I also have the honor of serving as ABA Wildy Chair. Joining us today for our opening plenary is the Attorney General of the state of Nevada, Aaron Ford. In 2018, Mr. Ford was elected to serve as Attorney General of Nevada. He is the first African American Attorney General to serve in the state of Nevada. And before being elected, he served as the Majority Leader of the Nevada State Senate. He has been the Minority Leader, the Assistant Majority Whip, and previously held a leadership role on several legislative committees. He earned his BA from Texas A&M University in Interdisciplinary Studies and his MA in International Education from George Washington University. He also earned a MA in Educational Administration, a Ph.D. in Educational Administration, and his law degree from The Ohio State University. Throughout his career, he has always made time to give back to his community. Among his many community accolades, he has served on the Clark County Justice of the Peace Selection Committee and has been recognized as a Mountain States super lawyer. He's also a rising star in the law, a former board member of the I Have a Dream Foundation Olive Crest of Nevada, and Junior Achievement of Southern Nevada. So again, welcome and good afternoon, Mr. Ford. How are you doing?
I'm great, Christopher. Good afternoon. Great to see you.
Thank you. So as you know, the whole point of our summit today is to talk about the importance of getting young lawyers involved in civic engagement. You began your pursuit of public office to make change, and we'd love to just kind of start off very broadly. How and why did you get involved when you started your career in public service?
How and why? I got involved by, well, let me take the latter question first. Why I got involved. I think it's an interesting story. I don't know if you'll agree or not, but my wife and I and our children had just moved back to Las Vegas, Nevada. We moved here, I like to say, at the turn of the century in the year 2000. We're here for 3 years. My wife clerked on the Ninth Circuit. I clerked for the same judge a year later. And so we stayed here for a little while and then moved back to Texas, which is where I'm from originally, from Dallas. And we worked there for a little bit. And in '07, came back, and we've been back since '07. But at that time, I had a senior in high school, and pardon me, a freshman in high school. And my son Avery said to me one day, jokingly apparently, but he said it. He says, "Dad, you said everything you do is for the family, right?" And I said, "That's right. Every decision I make is for the improvement and betterment of our family. I'm glad you understand that, son." He says, "Well, if that's the case, why'd you move us to a state ranked number 50 in education?" And he started laughing and he said, "Ha ha, got you." And I was like, "Well, that's actually a very good question. And it's one that deserves a response." And that immediately made me think, I mean, what do I want to do about this? Do I want to be on the outside looking in, throwing rocks at a system, or do I want to kind of get engaged and try to help fix a scenario? The culminating thought came up to run because my son, who wanted to be a doctor and who's now in med school, was a freshman taking chemistry, and they had a full-time substitute teacher who knew biology but didn't know chemistry. And I thought to myself, how can my son be prepared to become a doctor if he can't even get the right kind of teacher? So I decided to run for office, and that was in 2010. I put my name in the hat and ran hard for a district and got smashed. Lost real bad. It was like 62 to 28 or something like that, right? But I put my name in the hat. And that's how I got started. I got started in electoral politics, personally trying to be elected by running for the state senate. I had been involved on a grassroots level before in Texas. I worked on some presidential campaigns and grassroots stuff, precinct chair and things of that sort for my district. But running for office, the impetus behind it was education. As you indicated, I have a PhD in education. I have 4 out of my 5 degrees are in education, and so it made sense for me to get engaged and get involved there. And lost the first time, ran again a couple years later, and I won. And the rest of it, I'm sure we'll talk about, leads to me being right here now, sitting as Attorney General for Nevada.
Great. Well, I appreciate that story. I think for a lot of people, it's always nice to see someone who has been successful and risen to high office like yourself and hear that it wasn't necessarily always smooth sailing. I think that's
Oh
good.
no,
And it gives courage to us.
yeah.
Um, so a similar question, the how and the why. How and why do you think that this current younger generation of lawyers can get in the ring to effectuate change? Certainly we in the ABA-YLD think it's important for young lawyers, but as an elected official yourself, what do you think young lawyers especially can bring uh, to the arena?
Yeah, so another good question. 2 good questions: how and why. Let me answer the first one first. How do young lawyers get in the ring? Um, Young lawyers get in the ring by getting in the ring. That is, you find out what it is you want to do. What's your passion? What's your interest? Where can your efforts be best aligned with an opportunity? And you do it. And the reason why you do it is because I'll tell you what motivates me. And maybe it motivates you, but maybe there's another motivation for it. I do it because I owe it to my ancestors. Christopher, as you can tell, I'm a Black man, born and raised in the South. My parents, my grandparents, my family members were all subjected to, how shall I say, a differing treatment, so to speak. And we've seen efforts over the years to rectify certain circumstances. And so what I have determined in my mind as the ultimate motivation is to pay it forward, and pay it back to my ancestors for the struggles and efforts that they've undertaken. So, you have to find your own motivation. Find your motivation. Those are 3 words that I would offer to anyone who is wondering how to get engaged and at what level. What is it that motivates you? Is it the educational system, and you want to run for school board? Is it the criminal justice system and you want to run for a political office that allows you to change laws? Is it merely because you want to give back to the community? Then find a way to do that. And it's a necessity that you do it because your viewpoint is one that will be absent if you don't run, if you don't participate, period, point blank. I've given up a long time ago on trying to be somebody else, because that's already taken. Just be yourself, and find your motivation to get engaged and then to do it.
Great. So one of the things that you mentioned, I think one of the first thing that young lawyers think about running for is prosecutor. A lot of young lawyers start their careers off as prosecutors. And I know that as attorney general, people often think of you as kind of the top prosecutor in your state, even though the attorney general's office and duties are much broader than that. If you don't mind, let's talk about that for a moment. I'll start by asking, what do you think are some of the unique contributions that prosecutors can provide to their communities as public servants?
That's a great question again, and I think there are several unique opportunities. Everyone knows that a prosecutor prosecutes, and we put people in jail for violating laws that are within our jurisdiction. Um, but you can use this position in a way that I think affects real positive change beyond what is the general understanding of this office. And we'll talk about this a little later about what my philosophy is in my office. But the unwritten hashtag or motto of my office is our job is justice. And justice doesn't always manifest itself in an arrest and in a conviction and in imprisonment. Sometimes, and as a prosecutor, you can recognize that justice means exonerating someone for being wrongfully convicted, participating in an effort to ensure that true justice is being done, and recognizing that associations, organizations, the Attorney General's office, prosecutors' offices are made up of people, and people are fallible. We make mistakes, and sometimes mistakes we make undercut justice. And so you can use the unique opportunity that you would have in this office or as a prosecutor to ensure that true justice is effected.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I know we talk about justice a lot, and it does mean different things to different people. It doesn't always mean conviction. And I think that's really important, certainly for lawyers to understand. I think it's also equally important for the public to understand. Um, So then what about lawyers other than prosecutors? What do you think are some of the best ways that they can serve their community? Because, not everyone wants to be a prosecutor.
Yeah, so I think there are again several options that you can consider. Um, and as a reminder, being a prosecutor in the Attorney General's office is not all that I do. In fact, it's about 10% of what I do, um, if not less. We have a lot of civil practitioners here who do no type of prosecution. My clients are institutional in the sense that I represent our constitutional officers like the governor, the lieutenant governor. I also represent the administrative agencies. We also represent the citizenry and the residents of this state vis-a-vis civil litigation against entities that are taking advantage of folks in the consumer protection context, for example, or sometimes having to assert a state's right vis-a-vis an action by the federal government. So there are things that you can do in a prosecutor's office that's nominally a prosecutor's office that are not prosecution oriented. And in fact, our district attorney's offices here in our state do have a varied practice as well. They have a larger percentage of the practice that is, in fact, prosecuting folks, but they have civil arenas as well. But aside from running for this type of office, again, there are several others. School board. There are, a lot of people have backgrounds that lend themselves to expertise in other areas. There's a treasurer's office in Nevada, for example, and there are just several different ways. But the thing to do again is to figure out where your strengths are, what it is you want to contribute, and try to find something that aligns its opportunity with your desire to serve.
Great. Yeah, I agree completely. So if you don't mind, I do want to talk about, again, uh, going back to justice and, um, you know, what it can mean beyond prosecution and conviction. Does it serve the community best to have a holistic view of justice? And what are some of the ways that you see that you can, you know, for lack of a better phrase, heal the community in, hard cases beyond just securing that conviction?
Yeah. Let me. This is a longer answer than probably is deserved for the question, but I just want to offer a little insight into my background and what kind of informs how I operate in my current position. Before I was Attorney General, as I indicated, I ran for the state Senate, got smashed, lost the first time, but I ran a second time, and I prevailed, and I was able to become a state senator in Nevada. 2 years after that, not because I was ambitious, but because people suggested that I do it, I became the minority leader in the Nevada State Senate, leading I'm a Democrat, an unabashed Democrat, and so you should know that I was the Democratic leader in the Nevada State Senate in 2015. And working with some folks who had a different perspective on what a state's role was in helping folks aspire to the next level enabled me to learn how to compromise, learn how to recognize my own fallibilities, as I've indicated, to recognize my own limitations, and to come to a realization that I shouldn't be naive enough to think that I know everything about anything, let alone everything about everything. And so conversations around important issues are important. And some of those are near and dear to me. Voting, as an example, is something that, again, as a Black man from the South, I have always been engaged in. And in 2015, where we saw, from what my perspective was, were efforts to undermine the right to vote by certain folks in our state, I piped up and I chimed in. And that's an important thing for all young lawyers to keep in mind. And that is, if you do get elected to an office, or even if it's not an elected office, maybe it's an appointed office, or maybe it's a community organization that you're engaged in, your voice is unique. You may have allies who share similar thoughts, but your perspective is unique, your voice is unique, and you must be willing to speak up on issues that are important to you. A lot of people aspire to positions, they attain those positions, and then they get scared because they don't want to lose that position going forward. They don't want to lose the next Senate race, or they don't want to lose the next Attorney General race. And so they shy away from important and sometimes controversial topics. That's not my approach. I've always thought that we have to be willing to speak truth to power, especially from our positions of power. Otherwise, in my estimation, it's an affront to the ancestors who came before us, and it's a waste of an opportunity. in order to be able to continue pressing forward. You know, this most recent election cycle presented a lot of things that I had to get engaged in that were not in the job description, so to speak. Didn't anticipate having to engage in some of the types of litigation that we engaged in, but it provided me an opportunity to remind folks of what justice looked like. And again, it's not just the criminal context where justice is important. You know, we talk about it in the civil context where, you know, if there are certain civil rights that are being attacked or abridged, then our office has an opportunity and a responsibility to do what we can to protect those. And beyond that, let's say if we're not even talking about what happened this last year relative to the types of litigation we were in, we still have people who apply to state institutions, for example, for licensing. That's not a criminal process, but it's a process that engages in other constitutional rights, from due process to equal protection to whatever the case may be, and recognizing that you have to speak to those issues. And so I would encourage you to, whenever it is that you get engaged in whatever capacity, continue to speak truth to power from a position of power. Utilize your unique voice to do exactly that.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that, because I really appreciate that you talk about how a lot of folks, when they get to that office or that position that they've been looking for, it is really easy to get complacent and then avoid controversy to try to remain that incumbency. So,
Yeah, you know, and I've said this just yesterday, in fact, that complacency is the enemy of progress. It is. And, you know, yesterday, I'm sure we'll talk about this, was the anniversary of the death of George Floyd. And one of the things I'm proud of is that, again, I use my position as Attorney General, the top law enforcement officer in the state, to use this to talk about that important issue, to talk about the intersection, the unique intersection that I have as a Black man, but also as a man who actually has this badge right here. You see, there's an intersection there that I think I'm uniquely qualified to speak to. And you know, people ask, are we done with police reform? And I said, the great can always get greater. Don't get complacent. Don't just stop because you've achieved one thing. You have to continue to aspire to greatness. And so I agree with you. You didn't ask a question, but you use the word complacent. That's one of my favorite words to dissuade folks from utilizing and becoming.
absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And so something else that you touched upon is, as an elected official and a public servant, you represent an entire community, in your case, the whole state, as you mentioned. But also, as an African American man, as you just mentioned, you also, represent the community of African Americans additionally or especially. If you don't mind, would you talk about that experience and the impact that has on how you fulfill your duties?
Absolutely. Yesterday, again, was the anniversary of George Floyd's death. I sponsored in my office two bills that were directly in response to what we saw happen to George Floyd, but what also happened to Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, who was killed at the hands of law enforcement by the use of a no-knock warrant. It's unique to Nevada, maybe not unique, but a lot of states don't have the opportunity for their attorneys general to suggest legislation and to sponsor legislation. But we do here in Nevada, and I use some of my bills, some of my opportunities to sponsor two bills that were in direct response to it. And I spoke to it from the point of a Black man who is married to a Black woman, who is raising three Black sons and a Black nephew. That's who I was before I ran for this office. That's who I am as I hold this office. That's who I will be once I leave this office. And being able to incorporate my life's experiences into the ways in which we talk about justice, in this context, the criminal justice system, I think is important. And again, it's one that we shouldn't shy away from. Now, I do represent a particular demographic, a particular constituency in this arena, as we're talking about right now. But so do you, Chris, and Christopher, pardon me, and so do others who are watching us. You have a unique voice and a unique constituency that you should utilize, that you should represent when you are in a position to be able to do so. I speak truth regardless. It's not my intent or desire to make you feel uncomfortable, but it's nor my intent or job to make you feel comfortable. I just believe we have to tell the truth about circumstances. And most folks, from an objective perspective, can acknowledge that the criminal justice system has not been fair or equal to everybody in our society. And when we have found that racism has snuck into our criminal justice system, we have to look for as many ways as we can to eradicate and to remove that from our system. But what we find out is that it so permeates the entirety of our system that it takes a lot of work to do. But we have to start somewhere. Again, not being complacent, never becoming complacent. I'm proud to say that the two bills that I sponsored, one of which gives my office the ability to now investigate police departments for unlawful policing. It's called pattern and practice investigations. It passed unanimously. Now, hear what I just said, unanimously. That's far and few between on controversial topics. To be sure, 95% of all bills in the legislature pass unanimously. That typically doesn't make the headlines because that's not juicy, right? But the controversial things don't typically pass unanimously. And what I was happy to see was that we were able to get together with stakeholders on all sides, public defenders, prosecutors, the ACLU, police departments, community organizations, and to talk about drafting bills, one of which was the pattern and practice, and the other was a limitation of no-knock warrants, to come together and find a way to articulate a bill that would pass unanimously. It was both were signed into law yesterday, and I'm so excited about that. But it's to your underlying question of how my unique experience, my experience as a Black man in this country, has informed what it is that I do. I will, tender the mic back to you after this last thing. But 2015, we had just seen, I believe it was the killing of Tamir Rice at the hands of law enforcement. I believe that's what it was, and pardon me if I'm wrong in that regard. But whatever the circumstance it was, my middle son, who was then 14 years old, said to me, "Dad, you're a senator." He said, and I shouldn't have to be afraid to be around cops. So do something about it. And that was his challenge to me. And so what I did was to move a bill that required body cameras to be installed on all law enforcement officers at the state level who commonly interacted with the public. And I did so from the perspective of a Black man raising a Black son who said out loud, "I'm afraid." And I said it out loud to a dais full of people who otherwise may not have heard that. And I think it's important, again, that we rely upon our personal experiences to be able to share our motivations and to effect real positive change going forward. Sorry for the long answer.
No, I mean, we want to hear from you. So I appreciate that. And I especially appreciate, hearing about it. Sounds like all this inspiration that you get from your children, when it comes to your job. And I think that's great. It's probably a sign that you're having great conversations with them and raising them the right way. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
Christopher, great conversations. Yes. You didn't ask the question, but I'm going to chime in. I also have some not so great conversations with them. Iterations of the talk,
Sure.
especially when it comes to Blacks in policing. It's always a new iteration. You don't wear a hoodie. Don't go bird watch. Somebody gonna call the cops on you. Don't jog in your neighborhood. You might get an old vigilante cop. These are iterations of the talk that are not fun or not great, but entirely necessary. And again, inform and advise the way that I operate in my position unabashedly. I'm not afraid of talking about these. People say I'm brave. That's not brave. Bravery is when you are afraid of something and you do it anyway. I'm not afraid of this. Nor am I afraid, for example, of losing my position. And I think that's what sets some politicians apart from others, is whatever it is, it's temporary for me. This job is temporary. It's either for one term or for two. We got term limits. So I'm gonna do the most that I can during either the 4 years or 8 years that I get in this office to effect as much change as possible and be unafraid of a consequence. Because the only entity that I have to be completely consistent with is not a party, it's not a person, it's not an entity, a club, an organization, it's my conscience. And if I can sleep at night, then I've made the right decision.
Well, I wish we had more people like that, believe me. So you talked about some of that legislation. I think that's really cool. And I'll have to look into the system that you described in Nevada where they give the attorney general, it sounds like maybe more leeway or a greater seat at the table, so to speak, when it comes to creating legislation. I'm sure it doesn't hurt that you're a former legislator yourself, but one of the laws that I'm aware of in Nevada, and I think is really interesting, is this uh, relatively recently enacted bill for compensation for the wrongfully convicted to rebuild their lives after exoneration. Now, you're the 35th state to create such a law. Some of the commentary has said that it's actually the strongest in the country and a model policy. You've been very supportive of it, and you haven't been afraid to review convictions. So I would like to, I have a couple part question here, and feel free to answer it how you please. But what is your perspective on reviewing old convictions? I mean, why? My perspective is that many elected, prosecutors, and again, we kind of had the conversation about the role of prosecution in the attorney general's office, but it seems like many prosecutors or attorneys general are hesitant to review past convictions of their predecessors. Um, you know, do you have any kind of perspective on that hesitancy? So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this kind of whole conversation and this new law.
Yeah, it goes back to something I said a little earlier. Um, at our Office of Attorney General, you can ask any of the 400 folks who work for us what our job is, and they will say our job is justice, period, point blank, justice for all. And I said it before, and I'll say it again just now. I said it just now, but I'll say it again right now, which is that justice doesn't always manifest itself in an arrest and a conviction. Sometimes it manifests itself in an exoneration. And this exoneration bill was enacted about 2 years ago. We are the 35th state. It's long overdue. We have had several exonerations over the course of time that all that we could give them for wrongly convicting them and letting them out was an apology. And that was insufficient. And thank goodness we had a legislature. I wasn't there then, but I was already elected here, that passed in a statute that allows for them to be now compensated. I have been in this office for 2.5 years. One of my positions, one of my requirements and roles is to serve on the pardons board, but also on what we call the Board of Examiners, which is a 3-person board. It's the governor, it's me, and the Secretary of State. And this exoneration bill gives us, the three of us, the ability to approve of payments that come from out of litigation under this statute. I've been in this job 2.5 years, and no less than half a dozen times have I been able to give someone money as an exoneration because of an exoneration. And that should say something. 2.5 years, and at least 6 times, probably 8 times, I've already had to participate in exoneration hearings, compensating folks for being wrongly convicted. And we anticipate additional ones coming up over the next couple of years. I think by the time the bill passed, we knew that there were at least a dozen, if not 20 or so cases that would come before us. And so again, I recognize we're fallible. We make decisions that are sometimes wrong. We do have some folks who make mistakes. You got some folks who are also dirty, who purposefully do things that ultimately lead to someone's liberty being taken away. And in both of those circumstances, and any in between, it's incumbent upon me as Attorney General, but all of us as a state, to recognize that deprivation of liberty. And so I have no issue looking back at either my predecessor's convictions or my own, right? I mean, I have a unit within my own division, my own office here in my administration, that helps me to determine what we're going to do on appeals and things of that sort, vis-a-vis what justice looks like in a particular circumstance. We have to recognize that. We don't have to, I guess, because some don't. But in my office, we do. I won't tolerate anything but actual justice being sought. And if that means that we acknowledge that someone should be exonerated, then that's the approach that we take.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's excellent. And again, I love that you've been so supportive of this. Why do you think that is? I mean, as someone who I've formerly served as a prosecutor, and whether you're watching an inspiring movie about a wrongful conviction being overturned or a documentary, it does seem like there is this hesitancy to review your predecessor's prosecutions and convictions. Do you have any, opinion on why, or am I mistaken, or is that maybe a false narrative in these movies and documentaries?
Well, I don't know if it's a false narrative, and I won't purport to speak in percentages. I will say, though, that I think as a matter of human nature, people don't like to admit when they're wrong. And they also don't like to admit when their friends are wrong. Um, and I just think that's just a matter of human nature. And it's a part of human nature that we have to be cognizant of, and that we have, and sometimes it's entirely appropriate to defend someone until they're proven that they are wrong, right? Which would include previous convictions and whatnot. But when it becomes known to you that something's happened and needs to be redressed, then it is incumbent upon you to do that. Again, I can't speak in percentages. I don't know how many prosecutors are reticent or hesitant to look back at predecessors. I would just say that, again, doing that is a matter of human nature at some level. But I also think some of it might be protectionist in the sense that we represent a judicial system, a criminal justice system that we want the community to be confident in. And when we acknowledge mistakes, they lose confidence. I think just the opposite. I think that when we acknowledge mistakes, we can engender additional confidence to let folks know that we're willing to fess up, own up, and to do what we can to bring real justice to circumstances. So, again, I'm not certain if that is a direct response to your question, because, again, I can't speak to percentages or even rationales in certain folks' minds. I just think as a matter of human nature, we are hesitant to acknowledge even when ourselves are wrong, but certainly when our friends are as well.
No, I mean, I think it's a great answer. And I really appreciate talking about kind of the double-edged sword that it is admitting that you made a mistake from a government perspective, right? On the one hand, as you mentioned, you're going to have some people who say, well, you were wrong that time. How can I trust you right this time? But then I agree with you. I think the transparency goes a long way in saying that, well, everyone makes mistakes. Government is a human enterprise. And whenever you have that, you're going to have mistakes. And when we find out about them, we correct them. So, but no, I really appreciate that perspective. One of the things that we, are hoping to highlight with this program is, getting young lawyers involved, getting them, whether it's, advising public officials or themselves running for office. I think a lot of young lawyers, though, are going to be hesitant to jump into public service for a bunch of different reasons. I'd like to ask a couple of questions and get your perspective here on, what you think and what advice you would give to young lawyers who might have some of these questions themselves. So I'll tell you, I hope to run for office one day. And often when I talk about that, people say, man, I would never put my family through that. The way that politics have gotten, people will attack you personally and so on and so forth. Some people would say that the level of incivility in our country is at one of the high points, in our nation's history. Maybe we're not all the way there, and hopefully we don't get back to the point we were in the 1860s. But what do you say to someone who says, I just don't think I want to go through that kind of public pressure, so to speak?
There are a lot of things that I can say to that. One of which is that's a very fine and appropriate feeling and belief and response to have. This is not, it's not fun running for office. At least higher profile offices that draw the scrutiny and attention from a lot of folks. It is a family endeavor. I'm married with children, and so it's absolutely a family endeavor. Single folks, it still becomes something that can move well beyond you. There's a story, and I don't mean to talk you out of it, but I'm just going to share with you because, again, it's about telling the truth. I'm not trying to make you feel comfortable or uncomfortable. Tell you the truth. I want you to have your eyes wide open if you're contemplating these things, because I absolutely do recommend that folks get engaged and involved. It's a necessity, as I've said. But there's a local situation here where a headline was not that the individual himself was involved in a car accident that killed someone. The headline was, the grandson of former elected official was involved in an accident. You heard what I said. The grandson, not even the son, the grandson of, not even an elected official, but a former elected official was engaged or involved in something that made headlines. And that, to me, spoke volumes to the circumstance I find myself in. I had no clue, Christopher, that I would be putting my grandchildren in the headlines when I ran for office. Um, I didn't know that then. I knew that it would affect my immediate family. Absolutely. That's why we had conversations around it. That's why my wife and I talked among ourselves, and then we went to our children and said, "This is what we contemplate this looks like." Scrutiny. They're going. You have to be careful what you do, how you do it, what you say, and this, that, and the other. But my grandkids are now subjected to a screening and a highlight that because of my hubris, and by the way, introspection is important as well. You have to have a certain amount of hubris to even run for office in the first place. I think that you're the one who can make a difference. And in fact, you are one of the ones who can make a difference. And so embrace that hubris. But do it, again, recognizing that it's not easy. And, again, as a Black man, I contemplated different types of attacks that will come my way. And in fact, they came my way, even more brutally than I anticipated, though. I share that again, not because I want to dissuade you, but because I want you to have your eyes wide open. I want you to know that these are some of the things that can happen, and you should be prepared to do it. It's a no holds barred scenario here, oftentimes, where they will do whatever they can to win a race. I don't operate that way. The first time I ran, I lost, I told you, and I had campaign folks telling me, we're behind, and the only way you're going to win is to go negative. They told me that. That was their advice to me. And I said to them, I said, I have 3 sons and a nephew I'm raising right now, and I cannot go home and say to them that I'm going to go negative. When I tell them all the time, you don't have to make somebody else look bad to make yourself look good. You speak to your own internal character. You don't have to talk bad about somebody else. And so I refuse to go negative in that race. Again, I lost, but I lost with my dignity intact. And I lost with the reputation, I think, that when I ran 2 years later, that folks knew that I was a serious person about this, and not just one who was out to win for a position as opposed to trying to make the policy. So know that it's a dirty sport, it's a contact sport, but if you prevail and find yourself in a position like me where you can absolutely use your perch to affect real positive change, it's very fulfilling. Look, I've said before, and I'll be quiet after this, that this is the most fulfilling job I've ever had. And that says a lot. I've done a lot of things. I was a teacher. I've been a law clerk, which was the best job I had, during my legal career up until this point. I've been in the state Senate. But this is the most fulfilling job I've ever had, but it's also the most nerve-wracking. Keeps me up at night, wakes me up in the morning. I dream about it. But I'm blessed to be the one in the position to have helped us through these times of tumult and what's coming up. And so running for office, me sitting here today, it was well worthwhile. And it will be for you, I suspect, as well. Just go into it with your eyes wide open.
No, I appreciate that. Great advice. So another question that comes up, and this is one of the ones from one of our attendees today. Similar question. They have heard a lot of the great advice that you've given today about why you should run. But their question is, what if you're in a safe, and comfortable job right now? How do you rationalize, making the call to take the chance and give up a position, which is a good job, one of comfort and one that's fulfilling, and taking that risk of leaving, for elected office, which, as you mentioned, is kind of, it's an unknown when you're going into it.
Yeah. Christopher, look, I don't know if I got a good answer to that. It's entirely personal. And it takes some introspection, some acknowledgement of who you are, what you want, what fulfills you, what you want, and what it is you want to do. And I'll give you an example. I was a partner. Well, the first time I ran, I was a senior associate at my law firm. And I lost, like I said. And I made partner. I lost in November. I made partner in December, 3 weeks later. So it was, a bittersweet a year for me in 2010. The second time I ran as a partner, I was a partner and I won. And I served for maybe 4 years during my partnership. And I found myself having a tough time juggling the partnership and the responsibilities of bringing in business, being a working partner, fulfilling the response, but also of being an effective legislator as I wanted to be. I saw myself wallowing in mediocrity. And again, it took introspection for me to recognize that. A lot of people don't want to do that. Again, when you talk about, I'm going to tie this to the exoneration conversation. A lot of people don't want to recognize their own weaknesses, their own, fallibility. And so they don't, and they just ignore it, they gloss over it, and they act like they are, God's gift to whatever it is they're doing. Um, I did some introspection and I said to myself, well, which do I prefer? I know it's not mediocrity in anything that I do. So I'm going to have to make a decision, a tough decision. And the question was, do I want to make this money as a partner? Or do I want to have the opportunity to serve? And I chose the latter. And I had a conversation with my partners at my law firm. I told them, you deserve more than what I'm offering you right now. And therefore, I'm going to have to do something different. That's a hard conversation to have. I don't know if it's a rationalization to use the question, the word that was in that question, but it's absolutely a necessity when you make the decision to run. And the choice. I mean, I could have also said that I'm just going to be a partner and not be an elected official, because I had kids getting ready to go to college and other expenses, and I got things to do, and that would have been just as fine as well. Let's be clear. That it doesn't make me better than someone who decides not to run, because I did decide to run and to forego partnership. It just means that it was a choice that I made personally, and that's what you will have to do when you make the decision, because it is very difficult to be successful and effective at both. Some people do it better than others. I was unable to. I was mediocre at it, like I said. So, but now I feel real good, and I would encourage you to just think along those lines as you make that decision.
Great. Many thanks. So we have another question from another attendee, and they ask, how would you encourage young lawyers of color to get involved in arenas where they are traditionally underrepresented? And what are some of the key ways they can find success and face the challenges that are going to be unique to them?
Is that question in the chat?
It was in the chat.
All right, I want to look at it. Be certain I'll respond to the questions in there, because I think that's a very involved question. I just turned 49 on Monday. I just had a birthday. I've been practicing law for 20 years now. And I have experienced isolation. I've experienced loneliness. I've experienced self-doubt, imposter syndrome. Now, this is specifically in response to the question about getting minorities and people of color engaged. And I'm certain others get this as well. It's not exclusive to Black and brown communities, right? But I'm sharing vulnerabilities with you because I suspect others either have or will likewise experience some of this as well. I've been in circumstances where they have said, you're not like other Black people, which is one of the greatest insults that exists in my mind. They don't intend it as an insult when they say it, but just think about that, right? And I've always pushed back to say, no, I'm an example of what happens when people who come from backgrounds like me, impoverished, not having a lot, are given actual opportunities to succeed and are given the resources to do so. And what I've endeavored to do at every level, whether it's an associate at my law firms in Texas, as a partner, as a state senator, as attorney general, is to represent to the fullest. It's an unfair burden sometimes, but it's a burden that you carry. You can't escape it. I've told my sons this, 3 sons and a nephew, and you would ask them this. You can ask them, Christopher, who do you represent? That's the question. Ask them, who do you represent? They'll tell you at least 4 things. They'll first respond by saying, I represent myself, Aaron Ford. And if Aaron Ford messes up, then they're going to say that Aaron Ford, he's a mess up. He's a bad guy, and that's just Aaron Ford. But almost immediately, what I've learned is that they will extrapolate your mess up. I'm not talking about the positive stuff, by the way, because in the positive stuff, you're the exception. But on the mess ups, they will extrapolate your mess up to your entire family. So my sons will say, I represent myself. I represent the Ford name, because they'll say that Ford, he's a mess up, but you know what? All Fords, that's how they are. They're a mess up. And here's what my life experience has been, Christopher. It's also been that the next extrapolation is a very unfair one, but it happens. They'll say, but that's how all Black people are. That's what's said. Ford, Aaron's a mess up. His whole family's good for nothing, but you know what? That's just how those Black folks are. It happens oh so frequently. And I've learned in international travels that if I'm in an international country in Europe and I act a fool, they're gonna say, you know what? That's just how those Americans are. So we represent at least four things: yourself, your family name, in my instance, blacks and Americans. Again, it's a burden that is sometimes unfair, but one that you oftentimes can't escape. And so we're recognizing that as well, as you go through these times of just determining whether you're going to get engaged in political processes, what you're going to do in your firm or in your public life or whatever the case may be. It's just a recognition. It's an actuality. Don't stick your head in the sand and think that you can just muddle along and go along to get along. Utilize that fact, and I'll be quite up to this, utilize that fact to recognize that you have an ability at that juncture to truly represent, to show what the best opportunities are, what can truly happen when people from my background, as I've indicated, are given opportunities to succeed, or take opportunities to succeed and actually put their best foot forward in that regard. Did I answer your question, Christopher? Or was I just
Absolutely.
rambling?
No, I think that's great. And I think, we have kind of, I'll call it a follow-up question, because I think it is a nice follow-up question to that, your call to action about speaking truth to power, not putting your head in the sand. I do think though, and the questioner has asked, especially whether it's young lawyers, because they have to worry about their career, they might be an associate in a firm, or, they might be, an assistant prosecutor, whatever the case may be. They might feel that speaking out can jeopardize their professional advancement. So, what's
Yes.
your advice there, especially when you are a young person? Because again, I think your message is very inspiring. I think there are young lawyers on the webinar today that would say, I would love to do that, but
Yeah.
I also have student loans to pay. And
I hear you. I hear you. And Chris, my response is this: use your discernment now. I'm not just saying be out there banging on tables all the time. And thank you for the opportunity to qualify that statement, right? Because I've not always been this Aaron Ford throughout the entirety of my life. I mean, I've been Aaron Ford internally, but I've not always had the ability to use my voice in the same way I use it now. Discernment, diplomacy, using the correct timing to speak up on issues. I used to be an associate at Wild Gottschall and Manges, big firm down in Dallas. I was one of a handful of black attorneys there. I was the elder black attorney there. And I remember speaking to the managing partner there, Glenn West, a good friend of mine, about diversity issues. But finding a way to speak to him about it and trying to address it in a way that would be effective. And so we would put on programs, not only during Black History Month, but other cultural programs. It wasn't just about Black history. It was about, women. It was about, Latinos, and it was, and I had a receptive ear. Won't always happen, to be sure. So you have to know your surroundings. You have to know your environment. You have to know how to talk to folks. These days, banging on desks don't really do it. It wouldn't do it for me, and it probably doesn't do it for a lot of your partners. So it's not an easy thing to do. How I'm responding to you, and it comes with time. I just didn't. I recognize that I have to first get my foot in the door. I have to demonstrate that I'm a good technical lawyer, because that's important. Become the best technical lawyer you can be early on. Demonstrate your gray matter, and then begin to expand beyond gray matter and show some social skills and the need for additional social interactions and social conversations and or whatever the case may be, and pursue it that way. I hear you guys. You got to pay your bills. I got to pay mine too. And you don't have to do everything in 1 year. You don't have to do everything in 5 years, not even in 10 years. I've been practicing 20 years, and it's taken me this long to get to where I am. So take your time, young man, young woman, as a song used to say.
great. No, I appreciate that. Because yeah, I do think that's at front of mind for a lot of young lawyers, and I really appreciate the advice about becoming a great technical lawyer. From a technical perspective first and foremost, and building up that credibility, so that way when you do have an opportunity, and the time is right, to opine on something important, you're going to have that credibility, and help advance what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Um, You've talked a little bit today about how, not only are you the first Black Attorney General in Nevada, but you're also the first Black person to hold statewide constitutional office in Nevada. And you've also said your goal is to not be the last. So um, I'd love to hear, what do you think are some, great things that young lawyers can do to help, also advance that mission to make sure that you're not the last?
Hmm.
And what kind of hopes do you have for this generation and being successful in that?
Well, I have a lot of hope in this generation. I don't know, I forget the age cutoff for young lawyers, right? But I have a 27-year-old medical student. I have a 20-year-old sophomore in college, a 16-year-old sophomore in high school. All of those are rising. Well, those last two are rising juniors in their respective institutions. And my oldest son's a rising second-year medical student. And my nephew that we raised, he's working real hard down in Texas now. And I am so impressed with them and their colleagues in their generation. It's almost like four different generations that I see. My 27-year-old has come into his own, recognizing, and his friends, um, many of whom may be your age, are speaking out on issues that are that 15 years ago we wouldn't dare speak out on, right? Most folks wouldn't. They are intolerant of intolerance, and that to me is so refreshing to know that a lot of the stuff that my wife and I would get hung up on, and frankly, sometimes are still hung up on. My kids are like, dude, I'm not worried about that. Is what this person doing in their lives having a negative impact? And let me get specific. Recognizing the importance of letting um, um, marriage equality exist. My kids aren't hung up on that. That's a conversation of my current generation. To be sure, there are some in your generation who are, still debating those issues. That's fine. But I just see so much more acceptance for people for who they are than years past. My 20-year-old is that much more open to, you know, different thoughts and opinions. My 16-year-old, I mean, again, these are like four different generations. So I have a lot of, um, um, I favor a lot of what I see happening with the younger generation, including yours. And it's important that you continue pursuing that. And, you know, timing is important, as I've indicated. When it comes to the conversations, when it comes time to speak out on issues, finding out the way to do it in a way that it can be received is important. And you guys have that ability to do it. Continue to do it, and let us know. Let us old folks know when we are, on the wrong side of stuff. Keep speaking up and keep doing it.
Great. I'm glad to hear that because it gives me hope as well. So I appreciate that. That's your perspective as well. Um, I think it's kind of a fun question here. What is the piece of advice that you would give to yourself as a young lawyer? If you could, write yourself a letter, back when you're just starting out. I appreciate, as I mentioned, the advice about, becoming the best lawyer you can from a technical perspective. But is there anything else that you would, write to your young lawyer self?
Oh my goodness, yeah. You said young lawyer stuff. I'm going to have to expand that answer because it's not all about the law, believe it or not, folks. There are things that happen in your life that have dramatic impacts on you. Um, there are a couple things that come to mind. One of them is a song by Kendrick Lamar.
Okay.
Be gonna be all right. I would write that to myself back then to remind me of the difficulties that I was experiencing as a kid. I mean, look, I made some bad decisions that as a kid. Again, not mistakes, not youthful indiscretions, but bad decisions that were highlighted when I ran for this office. As a college student, getting drunk on campus and getting a public intoxication, for example, and that being used against me as a reason why I can't be an attorney general. This was 20 years or 25 years ago, right? Not paying speeding tickets like I should have and getting arrested for it and not going to court, just some bad decisions, right? And at a time when my head was in a fog, not knowing how I was going to make it, I would write myself a letter saying, we gonna be all right. Um, that's one piece of advice. Another piece of advice I'd give myself is a biblical piece of advice. I have what I call a life scripture, Ecclesiastes 7:14, and I will paraphrase it. And it says that in times when times are good, you should rejoice. You should be happy about it. But when times are bad, consider this: God made both the good and the bad, so that you don't know what's going to happen next to you, next. And that track, the commentary to that scripture essentially means that God's in control, and that when times are good, be happy. When times are bad, don't despair so much. Understand that God's in control. This is what I would tell myself. This is what I remind myself. God's in control, and I never would have thought that Aaron Ford of 1990 would be the Attorney General in 2001. But God was in control, and as Kendrick Lamar says, we gonna be all right.
Great. Well, I love those two references there. Big fan of Kendrick Lamar and Ecclesiastes. Um, so, yeah, as we close up here, we truly appreciate your time today. You previously served on another one of our ABA Wildy panels, for which we are greatly appreciative. I do want to give you a moment just to, if there's anything else that we, didn't get to ask you or address, we'd love to hear from you. Again, we appreciate your time and your wisdom, especially as we think about how to encourage young lawyers to get involved and get engaged, whether it's their communities, running for office, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, to encourage you to do whatever it is you seek to. Again, I'm gonna mention three words I said earlier. Find your motivation. I'm gonna share a story as we part that is my current motivation, and I don't know if I shared this on the last panel or not, but it really is my motivation right now. I'm motivated by my fourth great grandfather. His name is William Berry. William Berry was born in 1819 in Fordyce, Arkansas, born into slavery. He was put on the auction block to be sold, and he was married with children, and he protested the sale, stood up for his humanity and said, I will not be sold. I will not be separated from my wife and my children. So they didn't sell him. They killed him right there on the auction block. And then they sold three of his kids to a slaver in Texas. One of his kids is my third great grandfather, and I'm the progeny of William Berry. And my motivation is to know that his DNA is in me. And just as he stood up for his own humanity, I stand up for mine. To be sure, I don't want to meet the same demise as he met. But I stand up for my humanity. I stand up for your humanity, Christopher. I stand up for the humanity of all of us. And it's important that we have motivation like that that reminds us of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that can remove the fear of the future from what we're doing in our present. That's why I'm not scared about re-election, because it's temporary anyway. And as long as I'm living and working in this position, I'm standing up for humanity. That's my motivation. I suggest you find yours. And I look forward to hearing of the great stories that are going to come out of the Young Lawyers Division.
Well, that is a fantastic and very powerful way to close today. I appreciate you sharing that story with us. I'm seeing thank yous from our attendees. I'd like to extend a thank you to them as well, and just give a friendly reminder that tomorrow, the rest of our Civic Engagement Summit, Lead the Way, kicks off at 11 a.m. Eastern. So I hope to see you all there. And again, Attorney General Ford, thank you so much. It has truly been our pleasure to have you this afternoon.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Great.